think we're going to get started. There may be some stragglers. I think there's something going on tonight that may be creating some parking challenges. But welcome, everyone, to the Winning Lives Teen Wilderness Issues Lecture Series. For those of you who are first-time visitors, I welcome you. My name is Joanna Campbell. I am the Director of Education Programs for the Wilderness Institute, which is part of the Franke College of Forestry and Conservation here at the University of Montana. The title of this year's lecture series is Wild Hope, Fearless Risk-Takers, Art Makers, and Storytellers on the Wilderness and Conservation Frontlines. And we've been exploring the myriad ways that people of different wilderness and conservation backgrounds navigate challenging and difficult times. So, in these last 4 weeks, we've learned about the quiet and often unseen ways people like Arthur Carhart influence large-scale conservation, the ways in which public lands are threatened within an unprecedented political landscape, and how public lands should be a unifying force rather than a partisan issue. And in the last 2 lectures, we looked at the role that art and story can play in how we communicate conservation and preservation of wild places. I'd also, again, like to thank NCAT for being here tonight for recording the lecture. And next week, I invite you to attend the 6th installment of the series with photographer Becca Skinner, in which she will discuss her work as a National Geographic Young Explorer and her efforts in protecting Western landscapes. So, tonight we have Bishop Greg Rickel for his talk, Faith on the Front Lines. And I actually remember years and years ago at a Wilderness Issues Lecture Series talk by author Janice Ray, in which she said that the environmental movement would never really take root in the South unless it became an issue in the church. And I would generally expand that to just faith communities. That was 20 years ago when she made that comment. And I invited Bishop Rickel here because I believe that these issues of sustainability and conservation and climate have actually taken root in faith communities. Perhaps not perfectly across the board, but there has in fact been a sea change. And I believe that these groups are members of a growing conversation. Greg has served as Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Olympia since 2007. He has represented the Episcopal Church at the Earth Charter meeting in Geneva, Switzerland, and was trained by Al Gore for the Climate Project. And during his time as Bishop, he has also developed a carbon offset program with the Diocese of the Southern Philippines. So, please join me in welcoming Bishop Greg Rickel.
Thank you, Joanna. It's good to be with you. I kind of thought today, like I did when I came from Texas to Seattle, that my feet would never again be warm. I think it was 6 months after being in Seattle before I felt my feet were warm. We haven't seen 14 degrees as the high, even though we complain about things there. You might know in Seattle it rains a lot. We say it only rains once, October to April, and but it keeps doing it all along. I am really excited to be with you tonight because I actually firmly believe that faith and faith communities need to be on the front lines of the issue of climate change. And so I really appreciate you having me here tonight. And I would encourage you to ask any questions you want to as we go along, but we will, if the plan goes as I have it, have time at the end to ask questions. So you can also jot them down, and we'll do that at the end. But if you have a burning question that comes up for you while I'm going along, just raise your hand. I'll try to see you, and we'll go from there. This picture is actually the front of our cathedral in Seattle, St. Mark's Cathedral. This was something I'm going to talk about a little bit later called the Totem Pole Journey from the Lummi tribe when they were fighting against coal expansion and coal trains that were coming through our diocese, and we opened our doors so they could come there. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. I like the theme of wild hope because I think as a person, a Christian person, I would say, I think the gospel is actually filled with wild hope. It's actually based on that very thing. Wilderness also, I would say, is often thought of as a place, some place you go. But for people of faith, wilderness, we will often use that as a metaphor that's also deep within us. So it's not a place that you go, but often wilderness finds you. And so I'm coming at it from that perspective as well. And yet, perplexing, this issue of climate change when it comes to the religious and the spiritual. Sometimes we're not quite sure what to do with that. Now this is not doing it. Of course, technology.
Okay.
All right. So this is one of my favorite quotes. Wilderness is not a luxury, but a necessity of the human spirit. And I actually took this picture on a hike with about 9 other Episcopal priests that we took over the pass in the North Cascades, and we hiked down into Holden Village. And, you know, for us, that was a great retreat, a great picture, and of course that's wilderness for us. But in the course of that trip, we entered the wilderness that's inside us as well. So for the religious and people of faith, and especially for Christians and Hebrew Scripture, I would say we start right from the very beginning with the best news and also a problem. Genesis 1:26. Let us make humankind in our image according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. And I would say the word dominion has gotten us into some trouble. Dominion, depending on your theology, can mean many, many things. So you might ask, what does faith and theology have to do with this? And if you'd allow me, I'll go into that a little bit deeper into that, but I want to talk a little bit about evangelical versus Catholic Christianity especially, because this is how theology will play into this word dominion. In the evangelical world, in most of the evangelical world, and all of this is on a spectrum, you will see the idea of God as a sole actor. We really don't cooperate with God. God acts, and we kind of are the subjects of that action. In Catholic Christianity, or you might hear it said as mainline, although that's a difficult definition, you would see us as co-creators or collaborating with God. So it really, your theology, and we would say in the church everybody's got a theology, even if they don't think they do. Theology is how you see God. It could even mean you don't see God or don't believe in God. That's still a theology. How you see God, how you believe God interacts in the world, can have a lot to do with how you see the world and how you see our role in taking care of the world. So recent studies have shown that actually only 20% of white evangelicals believe human activity is changing the climate. But if you look in the mainline congregations, that's exactly flipped, where the belief is high that human activity is changing the climate. So in the faith world, there's a lot of division about this too, about how God plays into this and how we should play into it as people of faith. This is, if I have a boss, this is the boss. Michael Curry, who's presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church. You may recognize him. He was the preacher at the royal wedding. But he said about this, the work of saving this creation on one level is saving our own lives, and on another level it's saving the world that God has made and God has created, and we dare not deface what God has made. He further proclaimed all of God's creation is interconnected. The love that thrust the stars into the heavens themselves is the same love that gave birth and created the earth itself and all of the earth's children wherever they may be. So that would be a more Catholic mainline view of creation and the earth. So this is his main thrusts in the 9 years that he'll be presiding bishop, 3 of which have passed. His tagline is loving, liberating, life-giving, the Jesus movement, with God, evangelism, with each other, reconciliation, and with creation, the care of creation. So he's made it a major tenet of what we'll be doing in the Episcopal Church over the next 6 years. And in fact, I think the church is following along, and some of what I want to share with you tonight is about that. So a little bit about my journey. Joanna mentioned I went to the Earth Charter Faith Summit in 1997, and really that started, as many things do, as a free junket to get to go to Geneva. I just thought it was cool that I'd actually get to go to Geneva. I think it was the first time I'd ever been out of the country, believe it or not. So I went not because I was interested in the Earth Charter or climate change. I actually didn't know much about what it was. But I went because one of my parishioners, Jay McDaniel, who teaches at Hendricks College in Conway, Arkansas, and is also a process theologian, which I'll talk a little bit about, was very involved in this and wanted me to go. So we went to the Earth Charter, the Faith Summit there, and this is where my conversion happened about the fact that we should be, as faith, people of faith, on the front lines of this debate and this issue. This is where I first came to grips with the fact that the industrialized world, the first world, really has a whole different look at what the earth means and how we use the earth compared to people from other parts of the world. My memory of this was a Samoan man who cried in a small group that we were in during that time, saying, you know, I know and I love the people of the U.S., but because you live the way you do, my island is sinking. And it was the first time I saw, in the face of another person, this issue coming out to the fore. So I left there and, kind of went back to life like we often do. And then The Inconvenient Truth came out, and I got convicted again and remembered all my time at the Earth Charter, and got trained by Al Gore in the Climate Project and began to really take this message out to schools. I would go out to schools and teach the little thing that Al Gore taught, which was a slideshow in and of itself, and talk about the earth. And through that, I became known as the faith voice for the climate, which is unfortunate that I was the faith voice for the climate. But in Austin, Texas, there were very few of those. And that's where I was living at the time. And the first time I got asked to really be on the front lines of it was during a thing called Stop the Coal Rush, when there was a movement in that state to stop the 11 coal power plants that were in existence. And so I was asked to go to the Texas State Capitol and speak on the steps in 2007. And what I remember about that day was coming off the steps, a woman approached me and said, "Where have you been? The faith community should be out on the front lines of this, and yet we never hear from you, we never see you. Where have you been?" So I've never forgotten that. And shortly after that, I was elected Bishop of Olympia, moved to Seattle. And in the process of an election, we have what we call a walkabout, which is basically an election for about a week where the candidates for bishop walk all over the diocese and tell what they would do if they were bishop and all that. And in preparing for that, I never once really thought about the climate. Even after all this that I've been through, I didn't even think about that. But the question came up over and over again in the walkabout. Where are you on climate change? How do you think faith plays into that? And so I was able to share some of the past experiences I had. And that was one of the biggest connections that we had during that time was over the climate. And what I realized is the people asking the question were young people. If you don't know anything about mainline Christianity, it's graying. It's getting older. Every church I go to, that's what they say. We don't have any young people. And yet, this is the issue where we see the young people. It's where I saw it then. It's where I see it in all of my work, in climate change and in protecting the earth. Shortly after becoming bishop, I went to Lambeth Conference in 2008. And Lambeth, I'm going to show you a little bit about that, but it's a gathering of all the Anglican bishops in the world. And out of that came our companion relationship with Southern Philippines, which I also want to show you a little bit about too. But I do want to mention the TransAlta coal plant in Centralia, Washington. This is in about the central part of my diocese, so it's down I-5 towards Portland. And there's two big coal plants there. And I got involved in a movement to actually collaborate with government, with the coal plant, with TransAlta, and with the community in ways that we could bring an end to the coal production, but still not bring an end to the jobs, because that's one of the big economic problems often with doing this. And this was actually, what resulted in this is a compromise whereby those coal plants, one of them actually shut down earlier than we suspected, but it's supposed to shut down by 2020, and the second one by 2025, and they're being retrofitted to be natural gas producers with far less carbon CO2 output. And the company's going to spend about $1 billion to make that change. And all of that happened relatively easy. There was collaboration on that, of course. But I saw it as a real example of the way we could work together to try to bring an end to some of the dirty CO2 producers that we have out there. So I mentioned process theology and J. McDaniel. And I put this in there because I would say if there's a theology I adhere to more than any other, it's process theology. This is also known in philosophical circles as process thought. In process theology, it basically is not classical theism, classical theology. For instance, one of the founders, Charles Hartshorne of Process Theology, wrote a book called Omnipotence and Other Theological Mistakes. So his point was that's a mistake. God is not like that. God does not know everything. But what process would say, God knows everything that's ever existed, knows every moment. But in process thought, God actually learns, and God actually feels. They would also say that if God feels, which many people of faith say every day that God feels. But what they would say, they were scientists, so remember that, they said you can't feel without the ability to change. And part of classical theism is that we have a changeless God. Process says no, God can change, and does change, and in fact does learn. God always knows more than anything else. God knows everything that's ever happened and will in the next seconds that follow this. But God does in fact learn. It's kind of based in what you've heard of pantheism, would be God is the world, God is the universe. And I would say that Christians often get labeled as pantheist for being in the climate movement. Process theologians are really panentheist, which is to say, God is in everything. There is nothing that God is not in. So, for instance, if you've heard that this is a God-forsaken place, process theologians would say there is no such place. There is no such person. There is no such being. God is in all things. So, in the world of Christianity, process theologians are often very, very involved in the environmental movement because they see God in the earth. They see God in the trees. They see God in the creatures and in human beings. God is in everything. So process theology, for me, is an important link, in Christianity at least. Even Pope Francis said, called for an ecological conversion, saying Christians have misinterpreted Scripture and must forcefully reject the notion that our being created in God's image and given dominion over the earth justifies absolute domination over other creatures. So, the other thing I'll get in trouble for a lot is they'll say to me, you should not mix religion and politics. So Gandhi said this. I always say the church invented politics. I mean, we can't help it being it. I mean, I believe we probably invented it. And sometimes they'll throw up the separation of church and state. And I would say to you, the Founding Fathers never meant, and I think I could stand on history on this, that this neither would ever speak to the other. What they meant was neither should ever become the other. And I agree with that. But the idea that neither would ever speak to the other, challenge the other, be confrontational with the other, was not what was meant by it. But it is part of the reason, I think, that people of faith stay out of this topic often. So I talked about Lambeth Conference. This is a picture of Lambeth Conference, Canterbury Cathedral in England, where if all the Anglican bishops came, it would be over 1,000 bishops. It is just a messy, messy thing. A holy, joyous, messy thing. And this is from 2008, the one I was telling you about. This is our group picture. This is also a nasty thing. It takes like an hour and a half to take this picture to get 800 bishops to stand and be there in a pose. This is my favorite one. This is the Archbishop of Canterbury, our past Archbishop of Canterbury, who seconds as Dumbledore on Harry Potter. But I think this guy up here actually has the whole thing right, the one with his head in his hand. You'll also note that there aren't many women in this picture, because there aren't many women bishops, but we're changing that. More women bishops have been elected in the Episcopal Church in the last 6 months than have been in a long, long time. The one you can see right there was my suffragan bishop for many years when I first became bishop. The reason I show you this is where I met Danilo Bustamante, who's the Bishop of Southern Philippines, and this is where we developed the idea of having a companion relationship based on the environment. Because once again, when I was at this meeting, I saw again the clash between the first world and the third world. And what was stunning to me is that the third world was very worried about the climate and what it was doing to them. You all know, probably better than me, that the people that suffer the most from climate change are those most impoverished in the world. And this is true in the church too. So in the southern Philippines, which is Mindanao, the island of Mindanao, there's rampant deforestation. Their ecology has just about been devastated completely. So my companion bishop there, Danilo Bustamante, said, let's have a companion relationship. So that was in 2008 at Lambeth. It took me until 2012 to be able to go to Mindanao. If you know anything about the Philippines, Mindanao, many Filipinos have not been to Mindanao. It is overrun by unrest. Al-Qaeda is still pretty prevalent there. ISIS was there when I was there. So security was a real problem. And I didn't think about that at all. I just got on a plane and went. And I was stunned about how dangerous it was. I checked the State Department website after I got back into the United States and found out all the places I had been I should not have been. And a couple of places, they basically said, if you go there and something happens, we're not coming to get you. The prime bishop, I should have known this, when I landed in Manila, he had a meeting with me, and he actually told me, he said, he didn't say if, he said, when they kidnap you, show them this T-shirt. He actually gave me a T-shirt to wear, which is Brent Schools. which was a bishop before that set up all these schools, and he said all the warlords send their kids to these schools. So wear that shirt, show it to them if you get kidnapped, and they'll let you go. I never took it off for 10 days. It was a pretty frightening place to go, but at one point they took Bishop Bustamante and I into a room, more like a closet, and left us there for about an hour and 10 minutes because something was going on out in the street. But nothing ever happened to me. But it's a dangerous place, hard for them to get out of there too. But we did bring them to Seattle a few years ago. And I want to try to show a video. We were going to show that now, and maybe Joanna can. This is a 5-minute video about the companion relationship we have based on the environment with the Southern Philippines. That's it.
We might have a commercial here.
Diocese of Olympia. Several years ago, we, the Diocese of Olympia, were invited to consider a new relationship with some fellow Episcopalians halfway around this earth in the southern Philippines. The invitation came from Bishop Danilo Bustamante, Bishop of the southern Philippines, after both Bishop Nettie Rivera and I met him at Lambeth Conference in 2008. He invited us to come, and eventually I did go to Mindanao, the southern island of the Philippines, of which the Diocese of the Southern Philippines is a part. Bishop Bustamante's plan was to have a partnership based on and with a special focus on the environment. This is a huge problem in the Philippines, and especially in the southern Philippines. Deforestation has wreaked havoc on the environment and has denuded the land in some places forever. On my visit, I was so graciously hosted by Bishop Bustamante and his staff, shown all over the diocese, and was deeply inspired by their commitment both to Christ but also to the creation of God, making every attempt they can to correct our human error, an error, quite frankly, that we in the U.S. and other industrialized countries have far more to do with than do people in countries such as the Philippines, who often bear the brunt of our excess. And this is exactly why Bishop Bustamante and I believe this was the partnership we had to make. A partnership to help our earth, but one also to bridge the gap of understanding between those who use most of the resources and those who suffer because of that. So we developed a partnership and decided which specific things each diocese would do. First, this diocese, the Diocese of Olympia, was the leader and, in fact, the proponent and chief proposer of the Genesis Covenant, which was passed through our General Convention. The Covenant commits our church to cut our carbon emissions in half. The second part for us is a carbon offset program. This is where individuals and businesses calculate their carbon footprint, essentially the amount of carbon we put into the air on a daily basis through the lifestyle choices we make. My family and I have been doing this for nearly 10 years. The Diocese of the Southern Philippines, in turn, is planting rubber trees. Rubber trees are sustainable. They're a good crop, both for the land, for rehabilitating it, and for the air. Since the beginning of our program, hundreds have been planted, and many more will be. Since the inception of the program, my carbon offset payment has gone to this program. This is one way you can join this program as well. Just recently, our partners, Bishop Bustamante and a delegation from the Southern Philippines, came to visit us in Seattle. This also was a long time ago of our partnership, and we hope it's not the last time. In fact, we hope that we can begin regular pilgrimages to the Philippines and vice versa. In our Book of Common Prayer, in Eucharistic Prayer C, we pray this: "At your command all things came to be. the vast expanse of interstellar space, galaxies, suns, the planets in their courses, and this fragile Earth, our island home. Our Earth is indeed fragile. If we believe God created it, then it is ours not to use as we wish without regard for its health, but instead we are called to be stewards of it. Our partnership is one way you can be part of that. I hope you will choose to do honor to this earth, our island home, by taking intentional steps to care for it in what we do and how we live on a daily basis. Blessings to all of you. Now we got to get this bag on. There we go. Oh, we've already done that. So this is just a few examples of what's happening specifically in that partnership. The REFRA schools planted about 1,000 trees, and they're hoping to plant about 1,000 more. This is some of the expansion of the project in that in Mindanao. And then also we're expanding it into some demonstration farms. Several of those have been started. Cotabato City is where the sea city is of southern Philippines. And the Ubi Valley is where most of the Episcopalians are in the southern Philippines. There's about 40 Episcopal churches up and down that. And there's an agricultural community college there that's partnering with our project too, so we can plant more trees. This is just a recent report that we got back. So you can see that it's not just rubber trees. We're also planting mahogany trees and coconut trees, all good plants to offset carbon dioxide. And it's about 70,000 tons that we are estimating we've been able to help relieve. The big problem for us is the offset donations have not been that great. And I will tell you that one way I'm on the front lines just as a bishop is that we have a lot of people in our diocese that want us to divest from fossil fuels in our endowments, which our board of directors has resisted so far. We have a very, very small amount, about 2%. But what I've challenged people to do that come and talk to me about that is I ask them about carbon offsets. I ask them, are you paying for carbon offsets? It's interesting, you want us to do something with someone else's money, in most cases, not your money, but you're not willing to put your money into what you do individually every day. So I've even said to a few, you do that, and then I'll talk to you about this. Because we're trying to get people to really look at that. Now I'm going to show you one thing that we're going to do church-wide to try to make that more of an issue too. So, over 20,000 now of trees have been planted in the Diocese of Southern Philippines. We're keeping this going. So I talked about the Lummi Totem Pole Journey. This was in 2014. And this was probably the largest gathering of interfaith leaders to support an environmental cause. And this, again, was about coal terminals, especially at Cherry Point near Bellingham, which is Lummi land. And so we were very supportive of them. We had several thousand people that joined us that day. And it was interfaith, I mean across the board, faiths, not just the three Abrahamic faiths, but many, many other faiths too that joined us that day. Our presiding bishop and a delegation from the Episcopal Church also went to Standing Rock when that controversy was going on. Still goes on in some ways. He was there for several days, also the presiding bishop of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And many of our seminarians from across the church attended there, and from the Diocese of Olympia we sent about 7 people to go and be there at various times. The last thing I want to show you
talk about tonight is something that's going to come out in about 2 weeks. It's not out yet, but it's going to go church-wide in the Episcopal Church. It's been piloted in the Diocese of California, which is essentially the Bay Area, San Francisco. And it's a carbon tracker, but it's kind of a carbon tracker on steroids. And they've done a lot of work on this. And it's really aimed to do 4 things. First, to measure your carbon footprint, to help you take individual action, to do something about it. It's going to aggregate the impacts church-wide if we all do this, and whoever does do it. And then it advocates for climate protection. So that's its 4 goals in doing it. So this is the landing page for it. And you can see that this is in the Bay Area. Like I said, there are 250 households that are taking part in it. So far, progress 53%, 100 tons of CO2 is the goal by 2017. And I want to go back to the Genesis covenant, where the Episcopal Church vowed to cut its carbon in half over 10 years. That wasn't clear in there, from 2009 to 19. So 19, we're in the year where we're going to assess that. And the best we can tell, we're at about 43%. So we actually did a pretty good job of trying to cut that in half. Not quite there yet. But this will measure similar things in congregations and for individuals. If you scroll down on that page, it tells you what you would do. You create a profile. It gives you actions you can take, and it shows you how you can work together. And it breaks down the progress by households, dollars saved, tons of CO2, the actions you said you were going to do, if they got completed, the ones that are still committed but not completed, and then kilowatts saved, gallons of gas, therm saved, and water saved. So it's going to also do that. And then within the church, every congregation will have its statistics as well. So people will sign up, and quite frankly, this is a little bit designed to be a competition. So you're working with people, but also having some fun trying to do it better than the next person. Within congregations, you actually form small groups and name the small groups, and then keep track of this in the same way. So this should come out in about 3 or 4 days, actually. So it's almost there. You're some of the first people to see it. The Diocese of Olympia is an early adopter, so we have about 17 people that are working with this right now. And we hope to be one of the first ones that put it out there. So I wanted to end with a friend of mine, Brian Taylor. He has this famous picture above his desk, and these words with it: "She is gracefully noble, so familiar and so mysterious. Here's a holy icon, the very face of God." Faith on the front lines. Thank you all very much. It's been good to be with you. So, questions? Challenges? Yes. Yeah, and then we'll come back.
Is Episcopalian under the Catholic Church or the Lutheran Church?
It's the Church of England. So it's not under the Roman Catholic Church. It broke away in 1500, Henry VIII, all of that unpleasantness. That started the Episcopal Church, basically. We evolved from the Church of England by coming here in the Revolutionary War. We were the Church of England here. But then we were at war with England, so that made it complicated. And so for about 200 years, bishops were elected here but not consecrated, because the recipe for consecration is you have to have 3 bishops to make a bishop. So finally, Aberdeen, Scotland, they offered to ordain our first bishop, Samuel Seabury. If any of you have seen Hamilton, Samuel Seabury makes a spot appearance in there because he's the chaplain of the Constitutional Congress. And he became our first bishop. And then England got really worried that we were going to become a Scottish church. So they offered to ordain the next 2 bishops. And once we had 3, we could make our own. And that's what we did. And but we're still attached to the Archbishop of Canterbury. So it's not like Rome, in the sense the Archbishop of Canterbury is a spiritual mentor and head for us, but not an authoritarian figure. You can't tell the church in the U.S. to do this or that. But we do gather, like at Lambeth Conference and things like that. The liturgy, very similar. The services that we do are very similar. Some even say ours are more like the ancient Catholic liturgies, although they're not in Latin, even before that. So, yeah, that's more than you wanted to know. But, yeah.
Well, actually, my question was it was more pedagogical for you to possibly explain to this group when you go back to the evangelical versus Catholic. I think some people might think, the Catholic Church. And I know
Right.
that's not what you intend.
No.
Right. So you've answered the history of Episcopalian, great, thank you, but maybe explain
Yeah.
that to us.
Well, the Catholic tradition, there's Catholic with a capital C,
Right.
Catholic with a little c. Catholic really is a word for universal. So it's a universal church. But the Catholic tradition tends to be what we would call mainline liturgical churches that probably believe in some form of the 7 sacraments. They have, a different theology, typically. But yes, I'm glad you brought that up because, people will often ask me, are you Protestant or Catholic? And my answer is yes. Because I would say I'm both. I'm not Roman Catholic, but I am in the Catholic tradition. As Lutherans would be, Orthodox would be, churches like that would be considered Catholic. So that's good. I knew that would be a little bit confusing, but I had to go down that road somehow. So that's
Well, I
good.
know, and I figured I would ask.
Yeah, that's great.
I have another
Okay.
observation. I have lots of questions and good work, but just an observation from the visual part of the society. Your logo, your CCC, whose little ships are those?
Oh, the ships. It's interesting. Both of our dioceses have ships in our they are our logos. We call them emblems.
Emblem, right?
But they're like seals, royal seals. Every diocese has a royal seal.
Right.
So ours, being in Seattle, lots of water.
Yeah.
It has a ship with 3 crosses for the Trinity and all that. So that one comes from ours, and then theirs has a ship too, because Mindanao is surrounded by water.
Right. So this is not a criticism, it's an observation.
It's okay.
They remind me of colonization.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a huge problem. For instance, many times we will use Sir Francis Drake's great prayer, that everybody loves about. It is a beautiful prayer, but it's also written by a man who colonized the world, So I think we're struggling with that all the time about how to represent that differently.
And since it's a new organization that's on the front lines, I would encourage thought there.
Thank you. No, that's helpful. I appreciate that. Other questions? Yes.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the wilderness within that you mentioned.
Yeah, what do you want to talk about?
If you could expand more on that, I'm just curious.
Well, I think usually when I preach on this, because Jesus talked a lot about the wilderness, Jesus went into the wilderness. That's usually where I go with it, because if we're literalists, we're only going to stay where Jesus was in the wilderness, what was Jesus doing there, all of that. But I think for us, there's a wilderness inside us that we have to enter and discover, and that's really where I'm going with it. Process theology would say that too, that there's always a wilderness within us that we're encountering every single day and learning from. And then the next day, when we think we've accomplished that, we'll hit it again, that there's a wildness in us all. You know, it's not just something you go to or you go find. It's in us too. That's what I mean by it. Yes. You.
I'm wondering how you go about approaching the issue of climate change with members of the church who are, you say, in denial of it?
Well, I use that Nike thing, just do it, you know, because I actually believe we have to have the conversations about it, and I do. I have climate deniers in my ranks, there's no doubt about that. I've had people leave the church over, one guy literally left the church when I was elected because I had allowed Al Gore to train me in anything, but especially about climate change. You know, what I say about that, I have this idea that we always lean into it. That goes with wilderness too. We always lean into it. So, you know, I certainly attempted to talk to him about this. And, you know, I would say, this doesn't have to do with your salvation, you know, in our language. It doesn't have to do with your worth in the eyes of God, whether you believe this or don't. But it's also not going to be a subject that I'm going to be quiet on just because you're uncomfortable. And I don't think you ought to be quiet on it, on your views on it either within the church. But you're not going to get me to stop talking about it. So it's a difficult topic. I don't have a magic thing about that. And I think that's important to note is that no diocese, and even though Seattle is kind of the bluest part of the country, you know, even that place is not unidimensional on this. So I have that discussion a lot. Yes.
To follow on that, do you have any suggestions for how to productively engage with somebody who's taken a religious, theological position that is just set in cement? God said you're wrong.
Yeah, right, yeah. What I try to do is figure out where can we agree. And it may not be anything around whatever issue it is you want to ultimately get to. But for me, it's trying to figure that out. For me, this is not true for everybody, but for me as a Christian, I can say we ought to at least have Christ in common. You know, can we start there? And yes, we may see Christ very differently. We may see Jesus' teachings to us and what our expectations for us very differently. But do we have the person of Jesus Christ in common? You know, so I might start there. If you can't get that, you may be doomed in the rest of your hope. But usually I can get that. And then try to create an environment where you can have a conversation where it's not just about winning. At Lambeth, interestingly enough, in 2008, we had what are called Indaba groups, which some of you may know, but they were smaller groups, so there was 800 of us who put us in 40, and then we even broke that down further. But in the climate change discussion, it often got heated. But it was structured in a way where you had to listen to the person and at least tell their view. Now, I will say that in my Indaba group, there was a bishop from my House of Bishops. So one of my colleagues that's still in the House of Bishops that admitted in the Indaba group, I don't believe in climate change, at least being caused by human activity. And so when it got to me, I said to him, I hear you, and I believe you. I believe that's what you believe. I get that. He had said in his statement there's lots of research to prove I'm right. So what I asked him is, I want to see it. you know, I hear people say this, there's lots of research to prove I'm right. Please, will you take the time and care for our relationship to show me that scientific proof? That was in 2008. I still don't have it. I've reminded him a few times, but it's getting kind of annoying, I'm sure, to him and to me too. But I still don't have it. And so, you know, I think it's pressing, but also trying to do it in a way that says you're still my brother. But I'm also going to challenge you on this. If you're going to stand up and make a statement that there's lots of proof, and that's why you've gotten to your conclusion, I need to see it. I'd like to see it. Maybe I'll change my mind if you can show it to me. I never have gotten it. So, you know, I don't think there's not a great, complete way to answer your question, and it's going to end well every time. But I think I start with, where can we find the places we agree, and then try to work from there. Yeah.
Can you elaborate more on the tenant about the case of creation?
Say more about it.
Is the case of creation for one of the tenants for the overall Episcopal Church?
Yeah, care for creation.
Care
Yeah.
for creation, sorry.
Yeah. So, the website I showed you at the end, the tracker, is coming out of that, the efforts in that area. And the way the Episcopal Church works is very democratic. So the House of Bishops, if you become a bishop, you're a bishop. It's a life sentence. I mean, you become a bishop forever, all right? As long as you can fall in there, you're in the House of Bishops. It's kind of like the House of Lords, you know, in the British system. And then we have a House of Deputies, which is made up of lay people and clergy in equal numbers. Anything we pass has to pass both of those houses. So it's like our Congress in that sense. And the Care for Creation passed in our budget, so that a lot of our budget as a church is going into that. So that tracker's one example of that. There's a grant system. Last year it was about, the last 3 years it's been about $1.6 million that churches across the church could ask for environmental projects. And there was a special emphasis on areas that were impoverished. So a lot of that money went to Alaska, especially to the Arctic, where they're suffering from a lot of the climate change and water rising. So I don't know if that's answering it, but it's the three main areas that we're going to focus on and give our money to. So that's why that's in there. Now, I will tell you, honestly, since you asked, inside the Episcopal Church, there's a lot of argument about not enough monies in that particular one. So the other one was reconciliation, which is really on two things, gender and race. And so there's a lot of push to put a lot more money into that. So I'll just be honest, it's like every organization arguing about where we're going to put our money, but those are the three focus areas. Anybody else?
Yeah, I got one.
Okay, yes, sir.
Well, I just want to say, I took a philosophy class called Late Knowing last semester, and we kind of explored the idea of wilderness.
Mm-hmm.
I really like how you tied that in there. It's
Yeah.
really nice. But the guy who coined the term climate change, Wallace Broder, just died. My climatology professor brought this up today. He said that we need to move on from the term climate change and start calling it human warming. Is that something you've thought of?
No, but I love the idea. I do.
It might do away with some of that.
That's right. It breaks it down, you know. And then you have to decide, do you really believe in that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's a bigger step, I think. Is to actually name it human-caused change. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty profound.
So I'm for it. I believe in it. I could go there.
It's a big step.
Yeah, but yeah, it is a big step, yeah.
I have a question, Gary.
Yeah.
So, something, I think I just saw a news item today, in fact, about the trend of people being resistant to actually read articles about climate change.
Yeah.
And just that sense of climate fatigue, of like the bad news every day, and that sense of powerlessness, and what do I do, and I mean, I see response to that in what you talked about tonight, but I'm just wondering if you were to be asked the question on the street, what do you, how would you respond to climate fatigue, or I'm wondering what kind of...
Well, I mean, I believe in climate fatigue because I do sense it in the people that I work with. So what my cure for it, and I don't know that it's the cure, but is to break it down and bring it closer to home. So I think in our diocese, to be able to talk about how we directly work with Southern Philippines and the direct numbers that we are seeing there gives hope, number one, because we are actually having an impact. But it doesn't make it so overwhelming, because I think people get hit with the enormity of it and can't figure out, how do I make a difference in it. So for me, it's breaking it down. And the reason I like the tracker, we've done some of that already in the Diocese of Olympia, but the problem was it wasn't interactive. It was you doing it for yourself. I mean, I do it. I've been paying carbon offsets for 15 years, but there's no way to be interactive about that or to share it. So this new tracker is going to be where it's a community doing it, but it's a small enough community that you actually know people that are in it. You know the churches. You can see the impact you're making. And to me, that breaks it down and gives people hope that I can do something about this where I am. And I was telling you that I challenge people, if you're not willing to pay carbon offsets for yourself, you need to be careful about telling everyone else what to do with their money. I've actually had a lot of people take me up on that. One of them was the chair of our board, which is really the group that oversees our endowments. And he completely went into it. He bought carbon offsets. He started reading a lot more about that. And he's completely switched on this topic. He really does want to engage. So I wouldn't be surprised if we've talked to our investment group about the discussions we've had. And really what I see them doing is they're whittling it down until it won't be an issue for us. We're going to be able to say we're divesting. But that's complicated too, because even I would say it's complicated because of the fact that we bought capitalism so much. It's hard. I would actually argue there's no such thing as a fossil fuel-free fund, because we're so marinated in it in our country. So, a thing that's evolving now is actually screening companies for the ones that are actually looking to the future and trying to do something about their impact. And there is some, I think, legitimate benefit to investing in companies that are willing to do it. This is kind of like the Centralia coal plant that I was talking about, where they were willing to invest $1 billion to transfer to natural gas to keep people in their jobs. But that $1 billion, a lot of you might say, well, yeah, that's going to be passed on to me. But in fact, in this economy, they couldn't pass it on. That's not how it works. So they were diffusing that throughout their company and willing to do it in order to bring down our carbon. So, it's almost like your question, I think, but on a corporate level, is instead of being the enemy, it's either all or nothing. We either don't invest in you or we don't. Is to be in collaboration with them and trying to work towards a better place. Doesn't always work, but it works in some places. Yeah.
Let me follow on that.
Okay.
One of the most frustrating things in the wilderness politics world is the deal with the devil. That if I give up an acre of treasured wilderness, or if I give up an opportunity for a timber sale, I have compromised my principles and I have dealt with the devil.
Yeah.
Because the other side is evil,
Right.
radical, crazy,
Yeah.
herbaceous, greedy, whatever. And yet the nature of compromise is that you go in knowing that you will not come out whole.
Right.
You may come out better, but you will not come out with everything you went in.
Yeah.
How do you...
Or you could actually learn something. I mean, that at least has to be on the list. You might actually learn something from the person you think is your enemy that you've never known before. I think that has to be on the list. It may not happen every time, but it's got to be on the list. I think it's interesting, Mount St. Helens, I was going to mention that. That's in my diocese, Mount St. Helens. That's a perfect example. If you go there, they actually ran an experiment where they halved huge expanse of land, and they said, we're going to leave this to just naturally let it go and see what happens. And we're going to take this, and we're going to do what Weyerhaeuser would do with that land, in planting trees, replanting, harvesting, and see what happens. And it's really a mixed bag. You know, there's some things that Weyerhaeuser does, for instance, on that property, that makes that soil better and makes that land better than just leaving it to be just like it was. So, I mean, I don't know why I'm bringing that, but that's a compromise in a way. I mean, literally, they half the land. You can go stand where this half is being harvested and farmed, and this half has just been left to let's see what happens. And so I think we need to do more of that, where it's not the deal with the devil. It's how do we do this together? How do we get to where we want to get to together? I mean, the coal plant, for instance, you know, there were extremists, I guess we could say. That's a word that is heavy laden to understand. But people on the extreme ends that were saying, no, it's got to shut down today. It's got to shut down next week. What we were hoping for is let's just get it shut down. Let's figure out how that's going to happen. And, you know, in 2007, that 2020 seemed like a long time away. So a lot of people were upset with that plan because they thought it was too long. But in fact, the company shut it down sooner. They got to it sooner. And, you know, it was a compromise. It's true. It wasn't everything everybody wanted, but it was eventually going to have the result that we wanted. And a lot of people won because the environmentalists wanted the coal plant shut down. Of course, the workers in the community don't want to lose jobs. So we were balancing all of those things at the same time to make sure that people don't lose. It is a compromise. And there was criticism, there was. All right, up there, you have an ad.
Yeah, you said something I like before that you at times you lean into it when
Yeah.
you're faced with adversity. I like that phrase. In your past 20 years of experience in your efforts to raise awareness, when are some times you've had to lean into it? You personally or the church as a whole, but when are some times you've had to face adversity, whether it's from within the church or external?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I mentioned one when the guy that left the church after I was elected was somebody pretty well known in the diocese. And, you know, I had to lean into it then because, you know, I could have just said, well, just go. You know, I mean, if you're unhappy, go. But what I did instead was really try to meet with him and try to hear him out. And I would say as a church, we got pushed. For instance, when we did the Lummi Totem Pole thing, we got a lot of heat about that, too. I did a similar meeting about where it was on Islamophobia. And, you know, the Muslims asked me, where are we going to pray? Because this is going to happen right in the middle of our prayer service, and I said, you're going to pray where we pray. You're going to pray right back here behind the altar. And they did. And I took all kinds of hell for that. But, you know, I would say theologically, the people who are giving me hell are wrong. If it's a house of prayer for all people, Muslims are all people too. So I had to lean into that. I kind of do operate as a leader. I think if people are mad at you, you're probably not doing enough, you know, so that's going to happen sometimes.
How do we do this together, like you said?
Yeah, how do we do this together? And trying to listen to them, trying to say, I do hear you, I understand. Even if I don't understand how you're getting your conclusions, I understand you're angry and I understand you believe it. And I believe what I believe. But how do we move on together? How do we try to stay in a relationship? I mean, for us, I would say as people of faith, that needs to be the foremost thing. How do we stay in a relationship? And sometimes that's viewed as compromise. You know, and not everybody likes that. But I don't know how we're going to get out of kind of what we are living in right now if we continue to do the all or nothing. I just don't see it. Yeah.
This was a very concrete example of what the Episcopal Church is doing. Are there other faiths that are doing anything as concrete as this?
Yeah. I mean, Presbyterian Church is doing a lot with, they've done a ton more with divestment. Because Episcopalians resisted that a little more than Presbyterians. Lutherans are doing a lot of the same things we are. We're very connected now to Lutherans. We're actually in full communion with them. So even though we're distinct churches, we transfer priests back and forth. We do all kinds of stuff. So they are in this with lots of us, and then they're doing some of the similar things themselves. So
I have another question. Do you think that the particular diocese that you're a part of is more open to these types of things than possibly other dioceses throughout the United States?
Oh, yeah.
I think you're sitting in the heart of it.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not claiming otherwise.
Yeah.
Capitalizing on what's there. Yeah. And that's why what I said, I came from Austin, Texas, where basically most people I was around did not want to talk about climate change. If they were into it and were on the side of yes, it's happening, they didn't want to talk about it because they knew what it would cause with the people around them. And the reality is, many of them weren't, because that's the heart of oil country. You know, you just don't do that. And that was the cultural stunner for me, is to come to Seattle and find out that's what everybody wanted to talk about. You know, it was like an asset I had that I didn't even realize I had. Because most people, unlike the guy that walked out the door, were real excited that Al Gore had trained me to do the climate. I mean, they were just, oh yeah, that's great, man, I love that. Even though he walked out the door. But so yes, it's the bluest place in the country. I think.
By the way, did you ever meet Alex Foster from the Lummi?
Yes.
She's a friend of mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he may have been the one. There was a great story that I heard there. The elders and I were sitting around afterwards, and they told a story about Chief Gall. Chief Gall was visiting an Episcopal church in South Dakota, and they were sitting in a circle, and the priest brought him the wine in the chalice. And Chief Gall, culturally, thought this was given to me. He drank every bit of it. He drank it all. Then he handed it back, which, you know, the priest freaked out and ran around and said, what do I do? He got more wine, because we would just take a sip and pass it on. He drank the whole thing. And the priest came back and was getting down about the fourth person, and Chief Gall said, man, I'm feeling better already. I like this religion a lot. I think it was Alex may have told me that. Yes, way back there. You might be Episcopalian, sitting way back there.
I've heard quite convincing psychological research that the human brain is just not adapted, not able to cope with things that have great uncertainty, things that happen way in the future, which essentially sets us up for total failure with climate change.
Yes.
But the single largest global exception to that is religion.
Yeah.
It's something that people follow, great uncertainty in the future. And so tonight I see as an example of sort of that teaching going the opposite way to a crowd that's not necessarily religious. But I wonder if you see opportunities that are happening or that could be happening but aren't being made for people who are in institutions of faith to take that sort of, I mean, like somehow they have figured out, right, like how people can act despite uncertainty and despite something far in the future.
Yeah.
Do you see opportunities for that that either are happening or could be in our?
Well, I think that's a great question. I mean, this is one of those places where that can happen. I mean, I tell what I said to you, I say all the time to people that say to me, well, our church is so old. We have no young people. I will actually bring up to them sometimes, when was the last time you went to a climate change conference, a protest, anything? I mean, if you want to meet young people, that's where you go, you know? I mean, where are you going? Where are you carrying the faith? And why do you think the faith doesn't belong there, too? You know? So I think on our end, it's yes, in a way we've done what you're saying, but in a way we've also kept it very much a silo. And so it's trying to teach people, our people, how to have tough conversations out in the world, but to be willing to share their faith when they do that, and why they're convicted about that in the first place. Why can they live with uncertainty? And of course, even in Christianity, I would say that's a spectrum too, because there are many Christians who would say, no, I'm not uncertain about anything. I'm certain about this and this and this. And so, you know, there's a spectrum there too.
Uncertainty not being like a personal thing so much as like scientific proof.
Yeah, right, yeah. I don't know, it's a great question. You know, it's probably the age-old question. It's almost like the Odyssey or something. Yeah. It's good. Research it. Do a paper. Send it to me. Tell me what you find out. I think it's great. Anybody else? All right. Thank you very much.